Kayla Thompson sat at the polished conference table, fingers clenched around a capped pen. The room hummed with idle chatter, but her focus was fixed on Charles Donovan. His laugh echoed around the room, loud and confident as he leaned back in his chair, smiling smugly. "Yeah, I spent a lot of late nights on this one," he said, his voice brimming with self-satisfaction, while one of the executives nodded in approval. "Innovation like this takes a certain kind of mind to see past the obvious." Kayla's neck flushed with heat. A certain kind of mind. His mind, apparently. The PowerPoint behind him displayed a layout she immediately recognized. The project she had spent weeks working on. Yet her name was nowhere to be seen. Charles caught her staring and winked at her, as though they shared some private joke. Kayla's jaw tightened. She wanted to walk out now. "Isn't this the project you worked on?" came a quiet voice to her left. David, a junior developer, leaned toward her, eyes darting between her and the slides, already piecing things together. Kayla didn't answer. She just forced a neutral expression and focused on the front of the room. She had seen this before. Charles took credit, and the company let him. It wasn't fair, but it was the way things worked. Erica, her mentor, had warned her, "It's a marathon, Kayla, not a sprint. Play the long game." As Charles clapped his hands to signal the start of the meeting, he clicked the remote, advancing the slide. "This proposal will change how we approach automation," he said smoothly. "It'll streamline processes, making us faster, more efficient, and most importantly, more profitable." A murmur of approval swept through the room. Charles glanced her way, eyes gleaming with the knowledge that she wouldn't speak up. His expression said it all. He was in control. Kayla cleared her throat, her voice steady and deliberate. "Actually, I'd like to expand on some of the technical details in the proposal," she said. "I worked on the original framework for the automation." Heads turned. Charles's smile didn't fade, but something shifted in his eyes. He didn't expect this. "Of course, Kayla," he said, his voice smooth but dripping with condescension. "You did contribute, after all. I was just summarizing for efficiency." Kayla resisted the urge to roll her eyes. It was the same gaslighting tactic he always used. He was downplaying her work, as if she were just a minor assistant. "Well, if we're being efficient," she said, her tone light but firm, "let me go into more detail." She didn't wait for permission. "For example, the adaptive learning model in slide 12? That was a breakthrough. We had to rework it several times before we got it stable. The original issue was that the AI was overcorrecting for anomalies. That's why I rewrote the predictive algorithm to prioritize weighted averages instead of strict pattern recognition." She saw the executives around the table exchange looks. Some looked surprised, others seemed confused. But a few, the ones who had seen this before, now seemed interested. Charles let out a short laugh. "Sure, that's the technical breakdown," he said, trying to brush her off. "But the real challenge was..." Kayla cut him off. "The real challenge," she continued smoothly, "was making sure the system could process real-time feedback without lag. That's why I implemented the hybrid processing approach." Charles tensed, clearly not prepared for this challenge. Kayla could feel the energy in the room shift. For the first time in a long time, Charles had no response. David, sitting beside her, leaned back in his chair, his eyes wide with admiration. The meeting quickly wrapped up, but Kayla could feel the shift in the room. As people filtered out, they whispered to each other. Charles didn't even look her way before he rushed out. David lingered behind, shaking his head in disbelief. "That was incredible." Kayla packed her things, her movements automatic. "It was long overdue," she said quietly. David hesitated before speaking again. "Why don't you go to HR?" he asked. Kayla chuckled dryly. "And say what? That my boss is stealing credit for my work? With no proof?" She shook her head. "It's my word against his, and we both know how that'll turn out." David shifted uncomfortably, but then asked, "So, what now?" Kayla slipped her phone into her bag, her voice firm. "Now we play the long game. This time I'm going to win." Kayla sat at her desk, staring at the blank screen of her computer. The office buzzed around her, fingers tapping on keyboards, hushed conversations carrying across the room. But everything felt distant, muffled by the weight of her thoughts. The meeting had been a small victory, but it was only the beginning. One move wasn't enough to take down Charles Donovan. He would recover. He always did. She had seen it happen before. Charles knew how to spin things. He would find a way to twist the narrative and ensure his name stayed at the forefront, no matter how many people he had to trample to get there. He was good at it. Too good. And that was why Kayla had to play this game carefully. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Hey, Kayla," David said, stepping into her office. "I was thinking about what you said in there. That was huge. Seriously, you really got to him." Kayla didn't respond immediately. She kept her eyes fixed on her computer screen. She wasn't sure how to feel about David's admiration. He wasn't the one who had to deal with the fallout. "I don't think he expected that," David continued, leaning against the doorframe. "But what now? You're not just going to let it slide, right?" Kayla paused, considering his question. She had already decided. She wasn't going to let Charles get away with this. But she needed more than just her word. She needed evidence. Proof. Something irrefutable. "I need more," she said quietly, finally looking up at him. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about all the people he's done this to." Her gaze hardened. "I can't just fight him with what I remember. I need the truth." David seemed to understand. "So what are you going to do?" Kayla stood up and grabbed her bag, the weight of her decision settling heavily on her shoulders. "I need to talk to Erica. She knows more about this than anyone else. She's seen him do this to people before." David raised an eyebrow. "Erica, your mentor?" Kayla nodded. "She was the first person to warn me about him, told me to keep my head down, play the long game." She smiled bitterly. "I didn't listen." David gave her a concerned look. "Are you sure about this? Erica's been out of the company for a while now. She might not want to get involved." Kayla hesitated for a moment before replying. "I don't have a choice." She paused, then added, "We don't have a choice." Later that evening, Kayla sat across from Erica in a small, dimly lit bar. Erica, nursing a half-empty glass of wine, looked up as Kayla slid into the booth. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Erica said, her voice laced with caution. Kayla raised an eyebrow. "You knew I would." She gave her a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Erica sighed and leaned forward, lowering her voice. "So, you've decided to take him down." Kayla's expression hardened. "He's been doing this for years, Erica. Stealing credit, ruining careers. It's not just me. I know I'm not the only one. And if we don't stop him now, he'll just keep doing it to others." There was a long pause. Erica glanced around, as if making sure no one could overhear them. Then she leaned back, her gaze thoughtful. "I know you're right," Erica said slowly, "but you've got to be careful. Charles doesn't just have power in the company. He knows how to cover his tracks. If you don't have the evidence, they'll turn it all around on you." Kayla nodded, a determined glint in her eyes. "I know. That's why I'm here." Erica let out a quiet sigh. "Okay, I might know someone who can help, but we have to be careful. This isn't just about you or me anymore." She pulled out her phone and tapped on it for a few moments before sliding it across the table to Kayla. "Her name's Lydia Tran. She worked here a couple of years ago. She's been burned by Charles, just like you." Kayla's pulse quickened. "Lydia Tran?" she repeated. "What happened to her?" Erica looked down, her voice grim. "Charles stole her work on a major project. She fought back, but HR buried it, blacklisted her from the industry. Last I heard, she was doing contract work because no one would hire her full-time." Kayla clenched her fists. She hadn't known the full extent of what Charles had done to Lydia. The idea that he didn't just steal work, but destroyed lives in the process, made her stomach twist. "I need to talk to her," Kayla said firmly. Erica nodded. "I can give you her number, but be careful. Lydia's been burned, and she doesn't trust anyone." Kayla took the phone and saved the number, her resolve hardening. She wasn't going to let what happened to Lydia happen again. The next day, Kayla sat in a cafe, her coffee untouched. She stirred it absent-mindedly, her mind miles away. She had contacted Lydia Tran the night before, and after a hesitant start, Lydia had agreed to meet. Kayla didn't know what to expect. Lydia had been burned by Charles before. Trusting anyone again had to be difficult. The door swung open, and Kayla's gaze snapped to it. Lydia stepped in, her posture stiff, eyes scanning the room warily. She spotted Kayla, hesitated for a brief second, and then walked over. Kayla stood to greet her with a nod, and they exchanged a brief, tight smile before sitting. Lydia didn't waste any time. "Tell me why I'm here," she said flatly, her voice guarded. Kayla took a deep breath. This was the moment. There was no going back. "I know what Charles did to you," Kayla began. "I know he stole your work and buried it, and I need you to help me take him down. It's not just about my project anymore. It's about all the people he's done this to." She leaned in slightly. "I have proof that he's been doing this for years." Lydia's expression tightened, lips pressed into a thin line. "Proof?" She sounded doubtful. "I had emails, memos, drafts with timestamps that showed my work came first. You know what HR told me?" She scoffed. "That there was no way to verify whether I misremembered how the project was assigned. They made it seem like I was confused about my own work. And when I pushed back," she shook her head, "I was the problem. Suddenly I was difficult to work with, not a team player." Kayla's heart sank. She hadn't realized just how far Charles had gone to ruin Lydia. "So, what happened after that?" she asked quietly. "They ran me out," Lydia said bitterly. "Charles didn't even have to do it directly. He just let the system do it for him." She folded her arms. "They made me look like the problem until I couldn't stay there anymore. And then the blacklist started. People were afraid to hire me." She looked up, eyes dark with anger. "He destroyed my career, Kayla." Kayla clenched her fists. This wasn't just about stolen credit. Charles had destroyed lives. "I have something that they can't ignore," Kayla said, her voice low and confident. Lydia raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "And what's that?" Kayla took out her phone and tapped the screen until an audio file appeared. She slid it across the table to Lydia. "I've got him on tape, talking about how he takes credit for others' work, how he manipulates situations to come out on top." Lydia stared at the phone, disbelief crossing her face. "What? You?" Kayla hit play. Charles's voice came through clearly, smooth and self-assured. "Oh, come on, it's not a big deal. People do it all the time. You don't think I built my career off my own ideas, do you?" There was a soft chuckle. "You just have to know how to present things the right way." Lydia's face froze as she listened. Kayla let the recording play for a few more seconds before stopping it. "He admitted it," Kayla said, her voice quiet but firm. "Not only that he takes credit, but that he's been doing it for years. And I know I'm not the only one." She leaned forward. "There's a pattern here. If we expose it, we can take him down for good." Lydia's expression shifted from surprise to something more calculated. She rubbed her temples, clearly thinking. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice low. "You have no idea how long I've wanted this," she muttered almost to herself. Kayla's pulse quickened. "So you'll help?" Lydia's eyes met hers, and for the first time, Kayla saw something like trust flicker in them. "All right," Lydia said, nodding slowly. "I've got people who worked with me on that project. They can corroborate everything. We'll make sure they can't ignore us this time." Kayla exhaled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. This was it. She wasn't alone anymore. Lydia pulled out her phone and started tapping away. "I know who to call," she said, her voice steady. "We'll get the others who were pushed out by him. We'll have everything we need." Kayla nodded, a determined glint in her eyes. "Then let's get to work." As Lydia left the cafe, Kayla felt a rush of adrenaline. She had started something big. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all the people Charles had taken advantage of. Kayla was going to expose him, and she wasn't going to stop until she did. The tension in the office was palpable the next morning. Kayla stood in front of the conference room, her fingers tightly gripping her phone in her pocket. She could feel the weight of what was about to happen, the moment when the truth would finally come to light. Everyone was gathering for a routine meeting, the usual crowd of executives, managers, and department heads, but today, everything was different. She stepped into the room, her heart pounding in her chest. Charles Donovan sat at the head of the table, his usual confident smirk on display as he flipped through the printed handouts in front of him. Kayla felt her stomach twist, but she didn't let it show. Today was the day she would expose him. His empire of stolen work was about to crumble. "All right, everyone," Charles said, his voice smooth as he scanned the room. "Before we begin, I just want to highlight how proud I am of our team's latest innovation. This project wouldn't have been possible without—" He paused, flashing that signature smile. "Well, let's just say strong leadership, guiding things in the right direction." Kayla's jaw tightened as the words sunk in. It was the same old charade, the same manipulation that had allowed him to stay on top for so long. But today, the game was going to change. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. She reached into her bag and pulled out her laptop, connecting it to the conference room speakers. As the screen flickered to life, she saw Charles glance at her, a hint of confusion flashing across his face. He didn't know what was coming. The first recording began to play. Charles's voice filled the room, crisp and unmistakable. "Oh, come on, it's not a big deal. People do it all the time. You don't think I built my career off of my own ideas, do you?" There was a brief chuckle. "You just have to know how to present things the right way." The room fell silent. The sound of Charles's own voice was like a punch to the gut, each word coming back to haunt him. The executives around the table exchanged confused glances, some blinking in disbelief. Charles's face paled as the recording continued. "It's easy. They put in the work, I take the lead, and the company wins. Hell, half the people in this department wouldn't even be here if it weren't for me cleaning up their ideas and making them usable." Kayla paused the recording. Silence. The room was frozen. The air seemed thick, and for the first time, Charles seemed to lose his usual composure. His eyes flickered from one face to another, searching for an ally, but no one spoke. The executives were too stunned, too conflicted. "Charles," one of the higher-ups, Mr. Patterson said, his voice steady but cutting through the tension. "What is this?" Charles forced a laugh, trying to regain control. This is obviously taken out of context," he stammered, his usual confidence slipping for the first time in years. "I mean, you know how these things get. It's not as bad as it sounds." Kayla met his gaze without flinching. "Maybe we should listen to the whole thing," she said evenly, her voice cutting through his feeble defenses. Charles looked around the room, panic beginning to creep into his expression. No, that's not necessary. Let's just—" But the next recording began to play. Charles's voice, now unmistakable in its arrogance, continued. "HR, please. Do you know how many times I've had to adjust an incident report? You just have to make sure the right people like you. Once you have that, you can get away with anything." The room exploded into whispers, the faces around the table no longer hiding their disbelief. Kayla watched Charles, her eyes cold. She had done it. She had exposed him. And for the first time in his career, he had no control over the narrative. "Charles," Mr. Patterson said, his voice sharper now, "I think we need to have a serious conversation about this." Kayla didn't look at him. She didn't need to. The damage had been done. Charles, once so untouchable, was on the defensive, scrambling for answers. His smirk was gone, replaced by something close to panic. His career, the carefully constructed house of cards, was falling apart, piece by piece. Kayla stood tall, the weight of the moment settling in her chest. She hadn't done this for revenge. She had done it for the countless others Charles had trampled over, the ones who hadn't been able to fight back. Today, that was all changing. The meeting room buzzed with activity. People were pulling out their phones, sending messages, making calls. Word was spreading. Charles stood abruptly, knocking his chair back as he stormed out of the room, leaving the executives to digest the truth. The damage was done, and he knew it. Kayla didn't stay to watch him leave. She didn't need to. She had done what she came here to do. Kayla sat at her desk, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The office buzzed around her, but it felt distant, as if she were in a bubble, separated from the chaos. Charles Donovan's empire was crumbling. HR had already announced an investigation, and word had spread quickly. People were talking. Employees were coming forward, sharing their stories, sending emails, and leaving a trail of evidence that no one could ignore. David stopped by her desk again, his face lit up with excitement. "This is huge, Kayla. Did you hear? HR is already scrubbing through all the complaints. They're putting Charles on immediate leave, and they've started reviewing every project he's been involved in." Kayla nodded, her expression unreadable. She felt a strange sense of calm, but it wasn't over yet. Charles was a fighter. He wouldn't go down quietly. There would be more to come. He would try to spin it, try to salvage what was left of his career. But this time, the truth was too big to hide. "I know," Kayla said, tapping her fingers lightly on the desk, "but I'm not letting my guard down. He's going to fight back." David leaned against the desk, his eyes narrowed. "Do you think they'll actually fire him? Or is this just to save face?" Kayla shook her head. "I'm not sure, but they can't ignore it now. There's too much evidence, too many people coming forward." As she spoke, her phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from Erica. "The company's doing a full review now. They're already looking at previous complaints, and Charles is on thin ice. They'll either have to act or risk the entire department revolting." Kayla smiled to herself, feeling a deep sense of vindication. Erica was right. The wheels were in motion, and they couldn't stop now. Later that afternoon, as Kayla walked through the office, she noticed the shift. People who had once avoided eye contact with her were now offering small, supportive smiles. Whispers of approval echoed through the hallways. Charles's influence had been shattered, and with it, the silent rules that had kept his manipulations in place for so long. Kayla had taken down the one man who had controlled everything, but she wasn't naive. She knew that people like Charles didn't just disappear without a fight. He would try to discredit her, paint her as a troublemaker, or even try to spin the narrative in his favor. But this time, he didn't have control of the story. The truth was out there, and Kayla wasn't going to let it slip away. As she entered the conference room for the afternoon meeting, she caught sight of Mr. Patterson, who had been one of the most vocal executives supporting Charles. He was now standing at the front, his face grim as he prepared to address the team. "All right," Mr. Patterson said, looking at the gathered employees. "We've all seen the reports, and we know what happened. HR is conducting a full investigation, and Charles is on immediate leave. But I want to be clear, this is a company-wide issue. We cannot let something like this happen again." Kayla met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. The world was shifting beneath her feet, but this was the moment that mattered. She had done the right thing. She had stood up, even when it seemed impossible. And now she wasn't alone. After the meeting, David caught up with her again, his eyes wide. "This is really happening, huh? Charles is gone for good." Kayla nodded, her expression serious. "Not yet, but we've got him on the ropes." That evening, as Kayla walked out of the office, she took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs. She hadn't let herself feel this in a long time. Relief. But more than that, she felt something stronger. Victory. She had played the long game, just like Erica had told her, and this time, she was the one who came out on top. Kayla knew that Charles Donovan wasn't done fighting, but the truth was no longer his to control, and for the first time, it was clear he was finished.